Welcome to the Best Music Podcast with Dan Spencer. My name is Dan, and this week's featured guest is Patrick Cornelius. Hailed as a self-assured and resourceful by the New York Times, elegant and extraordinary by DownBeat Magazine, in whose annual Critics Poll he has also been listed among the rising stars multiple times. How long can you rise for, is my question. And bold and gifted by All About Jazz, Cornelius' discography of 6 albums as a leader and 2 as co-leader features established jazz masters. As a composer, Cornelius has earned an array of awards and commissions, including 4 consecutive ASCAP Young Composer Awards, now called Herb Alpert Awards, and Chamber Music America's New Jazz Works in 2012, and has been commissioned to compose and arrange original music for ensembles across the globe. His latest release, Acadia Way of the Cairns, is out now and available anywhere you get your music. You can find, and for those of you who are on video, Patrick is currently holding up what looks to be a genuine record, an actual record pressing of the album. It looks beautiful. Oh, and also CDs. There we go. Available at patrickcornelius.com. That's PatrickCornelius.com. Twitter.com/P Cornelius Music. Instagram.com/P Cornelius Music. Patrick, thanks so much for taking time to come on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for that introduction. And
absolutely.
I was just thinking about the whole the ASCAP Young Jazz Composer Awards, because I'm now back when I was young, which I am no longer. It did have a different name, and so just a sign of the fact that I am aging, which is the way of life.
Isn't it just? So before we got on the podcast, you were telling me that you're working on a really interesting project right now. You're actually mixing an asynchronous virtual big band project. Could you tell us a little bit about what's involved in that?
Okay, yes. Well, actually, I'm quite new at it. It's the first time I've ever tried it. For the past year, I've been a member of the BMI Jazz Composer Workshop, which is basically a rotating cast of composers writing specifically for big band that gets together and presents new music and opens for criticism amongst our peers and the leaders of the crew, which are Andy Farber and Alan Ferber, two established composers, although despite similarities in their names, they are not related.
Quick question for you, Patrick. Alan Ferber, the trombonist?
Yes, sir.
Oh, I studied with him at Montclair State.
Oh, excellent. Well, you know all
super
about
cool
him.
Guy.
Yeah. But anyway, and so this year, because of COVID, it's been the meetings have all happened via Zoom. Because normally what would happen is we get together and everybody would bring something, and there would be a big band there to play the music and read through it. And then we'd get feedback and hear how it sounds, figure out what works and what doesn't work. And so our yearly recital is coming up on June the 16th, I believe. It's a virtual Zoom recital because, again, we're not doing it in a venue as has been done in previous years. And so in order to present our pieces, we had to have them recorded remotely and mix them together. So, which is something I haven't done before, but so it's been a nice, very involved learning process. So basically, the members of the BMI Jazz Orchestra we sent them our parts. I'll just speak from my perspective. I sent them my parts, and then they recorded them remotely using their home setups, or in some cases going into an actual studio to do it. And then they sent me the part recordings, and I would assemble it in Logic. What has to happen is first I wrote the whole thing in Sibelius, and I exported MIDI recordings all synced up to a click track. And then everybody recorded their parts along with that. I had the section lead players do theirs first, and then then the section players to fill in their parts underneath the lead players, and so forth. So there are logistical challenges. It would certainly have been easier just to be able to rehearse and hear a band perform live, but here we are, and it's been interesting. And now I really am tired of hearing this piece that I wrote. So soon, hopefully, I won't have to anymore. But I am quite proud of how it turned out. So there's that.
Oh, that's going to be exciting. And when this is released, where will people be able to hear it?
Well, it's not being released in any sort of commercial fashion.
I see.
Although I will probably do a score study type video and upload it to my social media channels.
Oh, cool. Okay.
And then the recital is, of course, free and open to the public. You can go to the BMI website. It's also co-hosted by ASMAC, American Society Music Arrangers and Composers. You can go to their website for the invitation. That's asmac.org. Just go to their calendar and you'll see the invitation.
Fantastic. We will put that in the show notes, or if you're on YouTube, in the description. So when you're mixing this, are you using a reference mix? Like, are you going back and listening to, I don't know, some Ellington Orchestra type stuff to try and figure out where everything needs to be? Or are you sort of going into this project knowing in your head what you've audiated and what you hear as the end result, and then just trying to make that happen with the button pushing and the mixing?
Well, the purpose of this is not to produce an audiophile quality recording.
Okay.
Again, it's not going to be released on any album or commercially in any fashion. So what I really want to make sure is just that the composition is transparently related. So in that sense, I'm not getting too deep into it. But, I have listened to a tremendous amount of big band music over the years. So I have a pretty good idea of how I want things to be. And the big thing is managing people's different sounds from people's different recording setups, because everybody's in a different room using different mics and whatever, and sort of getting it to blend together. But
yeah, that's an interesting piece that I didn't even think of at first. When you're playing in a section, you have that real-time feedback of how everyone sounds around you, not only within your section, but also within the ensemble as a whole. And then you're always dialing in different elements of your sound to complement, stand out, do this, that, or the other. And that all happens in real time.
Right.
And then once you separate everyone, I can see what you're saying, going in and trying to get that cohesive feeling off of different performances. It's an interesting prospect.
And it can be a little bit awkward when trying to plan out how the solos are going to go. What I ended up doing was writing bass lines, walking bass lines for the solo section, and then having the pianist comp to that in the context of the rest of the chart recording. So I had all the horns do theirs first, and then I had a drummer lay down at like a placeholder track, and along with the written bass line. And then the pianist comped, and then I sent that to the trombone soloist, and he played his improvisation. So now the last piece of the puzzle is I'm waiting for the drummer to do a final track, and and reacting to the soloist. So I think the illusion will work out well.
So is there a reason why the drummer's going in last for those reactions? Like, why is it that you're prioritizing the drummer's ability to react versus, let's say, another part of the rhythm section's ability to react?
Well, I mean, I suppose you could do it any way you want, right? But as far as jazz music is concerned, what is most interesting to me is always rhythm and the interaction between drums and whoever the soloist is. That's always what gets my attention. What I find most exciting, particularly about big band music.
Those big rhythmic things, yeah.
So I've decided that that's how I wanted to do it. Although, someone, I mean, the drum test track that I have sounds really great too. I could have sent it to the piano player last, or I could have just sent it to the trombone player last, but I don't know. I just felt like this might be a good way to do it. Although I don't think there is a right answer.
No.
And this is my first crack at this. There are people who do this a lot. So, they all have their own method. I'm not planning on doing this any more often than I have to.
Well, here's a question I've started asking the more jazz-centric guests who come on the podcast, because I've heard it said both ways. Which one do you prefer? Swing eighth notes or swung eighth notes as a term?
Swung eighth notes, swing eighth notes. Well, I think it's the context, right? Are the eighth notes swung?
Okay.
Or do you want me to swing the eighth notes?
Oh, okay.
Depends on the tense verb. It's like swim versus swam, or swung. Swam.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thanks for weighing in there. The weighing in shall continue. So let's talk a little bit about your latest release, Acadia, Way of the Cairns. Can you maybe tell us a little bit what the album title means?
Well, okay. So the general concept of the album is that I wrote songs inspired by my visits to Acadia National Park in Maine, which is one of my favorite places in the whole world. And a lot of times on the trailheads, you see like little rock piles, which are called cairns if they're made correctly, and they're supposed to point in the direction of the trail that you're supposed to go. So the cairns are supposed to point the way. Now, what's happened is that over the years, people just think it's funny and cool, and they just build their own cairns no matter what, even though there are signs saying, please don't do that because the real ones point the way. But there are other trail markings to follow too. But anyway, the first time that I ever did serious hiking, Acadia was the place that we visited, and I thought it was really cool. And I came up with an idea for an adventurous sounding melody that sort of twist and turned, sort of like a tricky trailhead. And I thought it was kind of an apt description of what I was hearing and seeing at the same time.
So these cairns, they're at the beginning of every trail, or they're along the trail? Like the way I would think of trail markers would be like the colors on the trees, and you have one sort of blotch for straight ahead, a blotch with a second blotch up to the right for turn right, a blotch up to the left for go left, and then 3 blotches for the beginning or the ending of the trail. So how
you still see those?
Okay.
Cairns are more like a tradition, like a relic of yesteryear. But they happen throughout the trail, generally. I'm not exactly an expert on hiking yet. It's just something that I really enjoy doing, and kind of the thematic concept behind this album.
And the album does sound cohesive and, like you say, thematic. There's a distinct feeling to the whole album. I was reminded of Miles Davis's Water Babies, in the sense that there's different songs, different vibes, but there's this continuity that is felt across the album. And I was really feeling that with your album as well. So how did you go about finding that sound? Was it inspired by these walks, by the nature, by the food, by the people in Maine? What was going on to bring everything together?
Well, I can't really separate the programmatic concept of the album from the musicians that played on it, because before I came up with the idea to write music inspired by nature, the genesis of this project is that I had this band, collective ensemble, that toured around Europe for like 4 years, doing over 100 concerts, and we had such great chemistry together. And our last tour was in 2009, and I thought it would be really cool to get the cats back together and to do sort of a reunion album but have it be a different concept from what we did before, because it's been 10 years and we all grew a lot in that process. So I was writing with vistas in mind, yes, but also to the sounds and the styles of the individual musicians. I mean, that was very much a huge part of the mix. So it was more like I thought about, when I was writing the tunes, I thought about various places that I had been that struck me, and I figured out how I could put together a program that would be interesting as far as orchestrationally and melodically, and each tune kind of wants to do a different thing. I've done so many albums that are just basically the standard jazz thing, like you play the melody, then everybody solos, and you play the melody again, and you're through. I wanted to change up the orchestration quite a bit with each song, so that each song was a different listening experience. And then I figured, well, I know this. I've got this amazing pianist who can pretty much like execute anything. So I often have him. It's kind of like a big band in a quartet. I have him doubling bass lines and doubling melodies, and then playing written parts too that he improved on every last one of. And then also he brought another tune that we recorded. There are two tunes in the album that are not mine. One is his, and then the two ballads, I guess. Well, there are three ballads. One of the ballad is his. The other is the ballad was written by the drummer, Paul Vilchin. But anyway, so I was writing. I kind of like to plan things out as far as the program that I want to present. I put a lot of thought into like what's going to come next and what the vibe should be next.
So this is ahead of time. This is before you go into the studio. Okay.
Yeah. The studio process was the very tail end. I did a lot of writing and thinking before I even flew to London to start doing gigs with them and then recording, which is another part of the story that I left out. The band is, I'm the only member of the band who lives in America. The bass player lives in London, the drummer lives in Luxembourg, and the pianist lives in Estonia. And so we sort of got together in London, and we did a few gigs around the UK, and then went in the studio, and everything came together within a week. But in order for that to happen, I had to do a lot of planning and writing beforehand. So a lot of thinking, and even a lot of thinking before the first notes are written happens too. So
what does your planning process look like before you put pen to paper for the notes? You said a lot of thinking happens. Are you working like in Word documents? Are you writing essays? Are you looking at photos? Are you meditating? Are you journaling? What's that process like for you?
Okay, well, I wish I still have it handy, but I have these writing, these manuscript books. I must have like 20 of them. It's like the really cheap ones that I get off of Amazon for like $2 a piece. And I just go through them really fast. And I will do a lot of writing, like, like this piece, this is the opening piece. Want to have different sections. There's gonna be some trading, piano, bass will have the melody for a while, and whatever. I just write out ideas in word form. And then next piece, I want a, sort of a rubato melody, kind of like a classic Keith Jarrett European trio or quartet, and then eventually it'll go into time, and then it'll end with sort of sound, something that sounds like the ocean, and then I go back and look at like my photos and figure out like what kind of melody strikes me. And one of the pieces, which is called Darkest Night, is more experiential than scenic. There was one night when I was camping in Acadia that I woke up in the middle of the night and it was completely dark because they have dark sky ordinances, and I had no clue where I was, and I had kind of an anxiety attack. So I wanted to recreate that sort of moment of dread and ominous darkness.
What is a dark sky ordinance?
There, outside of the urban areas, there are no like street lights at all. Right. So everywhere is just completely dark. Whenever you're driving through vast stretches of nothing, there are no street lights anywhere.
And what's the purpose of that?
to keep the skies dark at night so you can see the stars.
What? So there's no, it's not like for migrating animals, and it's literally just for the sort of aesthetic of having the dark sky at night?
Well, I don't know. Maybe.
Oh, okay.
I couldn't say. But I think the idea is to cut down on light pollution.
Huh. Interesting.
So, it makes it a really great place to visit if you want to see the stars. But anyway, so I had this idea for that song in particular, and I came up with so in my notebook where I'm writing like words and stuff under Darkest Night, I think, and I didn't even come up with it. I might have come up with that title first, actually, which is rare. I just came up with the idea for a bass line, something that sounded like evil and ominous. And then I got to figure out what would be the most dramatic way to orchestrate that, because if it's just my alto saxophone playing it, it doesn't sound as big and brooding. So I put it in the bass, and I figure out how can I make it. So I wanted the section of the tune ended up being AABC actually, and I thought, like, how can I make each time when it goes back to the A, to have it not sound the same as it did before, because I'm always thinking, how can I add a little variety each time? And I thought, well, it'll be even more ominous if I then the second time through have the piano double the bass in the left hand, but at the octave. And that's sort of how I come up with ideas of how I can get different sounds or add variety. And sometimes I'll write it in words, and sometimes I'll write little fragments of notes here and there. But I usually have a lot of information going before I actually sit down and like formally put measures and figure out like keys and time signatures and things.
So if we look at sort of the pie chart of your time spent on an album, what percentage of time is spent leading up to, well, let's break it down. What percentage of time is spent in that sort of pre-notes phase? How long do you spend in the notes phase? And then what is it, like a day, 2 days in the studio? How does that work?
Okay. Well, even before we get to the studio, just talking about the composition process.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's the notebook where I've been working on my big band compositions. And particularly the one that I just came up with. Right. So you will see here, and it's not as organized as it should be. It's just like, you notice here, I've written out sort of like a rough, I don't know if you can see. Here we go.
Yeah, okay.
No, I've written out like a rough outline. You probably can't read it because of the light balance.
Yeah.
But anyway, of the form of the chart, right? I come up just spitballing ideas. I have here a theme A, trombone melody solo, bass ostinato, theme A prime, solo trombone melody with the saxes counterline, brass enters, maybe second ending, punch, then take over top melody, theme B, brass tutti, et cetera, et cetera. This is just where I'm coming up with stuff. And then you'll see here also, I just have some random voicings here. I might have written that like a lot further down in the process in random chords written. So this is like so much of the work for me because I'm a very slow writer. I have to be very sure of something before I commit to paper, which I wish I couldn't be. I wish I was the sort of writer who could just write whatever comes first and then just edit everything afterwards. But my brain doesn't want to work that way. But coming back to Acadia, way to Cairns, by the time it comes to the studio, we had one rehearsal before our first gig, and I had charts of everything printed out. And we played through it, and the whole time we're playing through it, we're also like crossing stuff out, like renotating things. Because this was a band concept album, and I don't think that was said before, but I'll say it. I wanted this to be a band concept album and not like about me so much. It was important for me to have the feedback on the compositions from the other members of the band and have them be able to make changes to make the songs their own, because I wanted everybody to have ownership of it. But over the course of 3 gigs and 2 rehearsals like that, we came up with we perfected and polished the tunes really quickly. So by the time we got to the studio, we did 1 day in the studio, and frankly, about half the time was spent setting up all the lights and video equipment for filming the 2 singles that we did for the video single release. the rest of the time, I think everything else was in like 1 or 2 takes. Because once we started playing the gigs together, we sort of locked back into our old rhythm from all the gigs we did together like 10 years earlier.
So the process was the sort of overarching theme, writing down ideas, looking at photos, then pen to paper, writing out sketches and ideas, then pen to paper, writing out more sort of formal parts of the song and a more structured approach, then gigging, rehearsals, then a day in the studio.
Right, but I also left out the part where I put all the pieces from my manuscript into Sibelius. And then I sequenced them into Logic to make practice tracks to send to the cats in Europe to say, like, what do you think about this? This is how I'm thinking this is sounding, and then Christian, the piano player, Christian Rondelou, from that already had made his revisions before we had our first rehearsal.
Oh, wow.
So that's an important step too, particularly when you're not getting together face to face with musicians because they live in different continents.
Wow. So all told, how long did this entire process take you?
Well, I started writing the music in December 2018, and the recording session was in like May 19th, 2019. So I think we, around 5 months from beginning to end.
Now, you said you started writing the music in 2018. At what point did you start with the written overarching strategy of the whole thing?
December of 2018.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Because that's when we decided, the whole idea was that we wanted to do a reunion tour, but then we realized that we should probably have a new album and a new concept. And it was supposed to be all of us contributing, but somehow I just ended up taking over the process, I think, because everybody else was way more busy than I was, which isn't true because I'm very busy too. But I tend to have a control freak sort of mentality. So we only booked the whole thing and decided to do it that December. And so I remember going to hear Miguel Zenon at the Village Vanguard, who's a great saxophonist and also a friend of mine from when I was at Berkeley. I went to hear his band, and I really enjoy the way that all his tunes, they're not just tunes that they play. Like I said before, they don't just play the heads and then everybody solos and then they play the head out. Every detail is thought through meticulously. He put so much attention into the orchestration of the quartet, and trying to make things different and programmatic. And that very much influenced my concept for what I wanted to do with the band Acadia.
Wow. So you have this, it's a very interesting process to start it off with the ideas, the photos, the writing, then the notation, then translating the notation through various media, and then finally recording. Once that was done, were you then basically in charge of the publicity, the media, everything that comes afterwards for the release?
No, I was not, although I was involved a lot. So this is about the 8th album that I've been involved in releasing where I was a leader or co-leader. And, so at this point we have professionals that we work with in the process to get these things out and promoted. But even still, when you're hiring professionals, you still have to do a lot of work on your end to make it successful, because the easier you can make their job, the better results you're going to get. From the beginning, I knew that this album was going to be released on Whirlwind Recordings, because frankly, the bass player in the band is the founder of the record label.
Oh, okay.
And Michael Janisch. And he's a really good friend of mine, and we've recorded and played together so much over the years. And we just decided that this was going to be a whirlwind project. and he has his team in place. So basically, his team told me what they need from me and what the timeline is for, for bios, for photos, for, whatever, for little video clips, for coordinating social media posts. They basically, they have a really strong promotions team. They have publicists for Europe, a publicist for the UK, a publicist for America, and they have an office coordinator who says, "Here's your schedule for the release, and this is when you have to make these deadlines to do these things, and this is when we're going to do social media posts to coordinate." So I didn't do it all myself, but that doesn't mean that there wasn't a lot of work required on my end. So they have a really great team, and we got some really good results from the campaign for this album, especially considering that there was no release tour because of COVID. And that was the whole point of the project in the first place, was because we wanted to tour. And then we couldn't. And so then the album released. And it's a funny point because originally it was going to be released as the band's name, just as the band's name was going to be Acadia, and the album was going to be Way of the Cairns. It was going to be like a debut album or re-debut, because our old name was the Transatlantic Collective, and we had an album under that name too. But because there was no tour, because of COVID, the band didn't really exist except on paper. So we thought the best thing to do was release it under my name, because we would get probably better coverage that way. So that's the, the story.
And I think a quick word to anyone out there who's either partnered with a record label or going indie, regardless of who you hire to do publicity or who you partner with to do publicity, like Patrick was saying, the way you get the most bang for your buck is by either coordinating. You're still going to end up doing some work, and that's how you're going to get the best results.
Yes, and the more organized and planned out you can be well in advance of when everything starts. You can set a schedule, a timeline. I have a good friend who self-released an album that was very successful, and he wrote in advance all his tweets on using TweetDeck or whatever, and scheduled them, and scheduled his Instagram posts. The more organized you can be before the process starts, and the more you can keep to that schedule, the better results you're going to get. Always.
Patrick, do you have anything else you want to talk about for Way of the Cairns that we didn't bring up?
Just that it is available on the Whirlwind Recordings Bandcamp store. We have another Bandcamp Friday coming up. I don't know when this episode is going to be released, but Bandcamp Friday, the first Friday of every month, Bandcamp waives their fees, so artists and labels get 100% of the takes.
Oh,
so
good.
It's a good time to buy music on Bandcamp. Bandcamp is always the most equitable artist support solution. However, we appreciate you spending money on music from any store, whether it's iTunes or Amazon or anything, because it's important that that music continues to have value in our society. And that's all I want to say.
Fantastic. We'll put links to the album, the Bandcamp link, in the description if you're on YouTube, and if you're on audio, it's in the show notes. Check it out. So let's talk a little bit about what goes on around the music to make the music successful for you.
Okay.
Because obviously, if you didn't sleep and you didn't eat, to go in and do a recording session would be a pretty rough thing to do. So what is the number of hours of sleep that you need so that the next day you have no impact on your performance or creativity? To put it another way, what's that magic number that you dip under and all of a sudden you're just not quite on the game the same way?
Are you talking about the day of the studio, or from a day-to-day being productive artist?
Day-to-day being a productive artist.
Well, once you get to be in your early 40s, like I am, your sleep schedule is no longer subject to what your needs are. You have young children who have to be up at 6:30 a.m., whether or not you had a gig until 1 in the morning the night before. you just have to try to be, if you're going to have, so your whole world changes when you have kids, as it should, because you are no longer the most important person in your life. And your life has to be about more than music. It just has to, because you're a parent. So if you know that you're going to have to wake up to get your kids ready for school super early, and you know that you have a gig that you're not coming, that's going to go till late. Maybe you don't hang out for an hour and have a few more beers after the gig. Maybe you just come straight home, or the next night, if you can, if you don't have anything going on, try to schedule an early bedtime, or just be relaxed at least. And I'm finding, as I get into my 40s, it's not as easy for me to get home at 2 a.m. and wake up at 6, as it was when I was in my early 20s, which I frequently did. So the important thing is to listen to your body. Try to make sure that you're making good choices. Make sure that your nutrition is appropriate, because that matters a big deal. When I was in my 20s, again, I don't want to make this so much about age, but I guess it is, because that's a part of my reality. When I was in my 20s, I could, at 10 o'clock at night, get home from whatever, eat a bacon cheeseburger or a pint of ice cream, and get up the next morning and run for 3 miles and feel great. Now, if I eat anything past 5 p.m., no matter what, then I get crippling heartburn. And the next day, I just feel like I'm in a sodium coma. So,
oh, wow.
So nutrition is super important. So is exercise.
Well, let's talk about exercise in a second. If I could just pull you back to try and get an answer. What is the number of hours of sleep that you need to get? And if you don't get that, you're feeling an impact on your creativity and performance?
Less than 7 hours, I think.
So anything under 7, you're starting to feel it throughout the day.
I'm going to feel it, yeah. And I will have to start thinking about when I can schedule myself some rest.
I see. So do you ever use mindfulness, or have you ever used mindfulness or meditation to impact creativity or performance?
I have used mindfulness and meditation, but not necessarily for the sake of creativity. I find that my creativity works best when my mind is not a blank slate, when it is in fact affected and influenced by external and internal stimuli.
That's really interesting. Can you talk about that experience, the difference? So are you saying that if you meditate and you get to that sort of state of relative equanimity, and you're just sort of grooving along, just in the moment, observing, you're not feeling as inspired as when you're sort of in the flow of life?
I don't know if I would use the word inspired.
Okay.
Because, well, first of all, I have to preface this by saying that I am... I have been diagnosed with adult ADHD.
Oh,
and
me too.
I was diagnosed. Oh, there you go. So I was diagnosed as a child with ADHD.
Yes.
It's something that has affected every aspect of my life.
Yeah.
And I find that my creativity works best when I embrace the fact that my brain is more or less like a storm cloud that is shooting off random sparks of lightning here and there. Now it's different from, say, talking about like, well, I need to practice my long tones for 30 minutes. And then,
that's different.
And then my moist flute etudes or whatever, that requires a more meditative mindset. But as far as writing music, it's definitely best if I am in the mix of soup, because I think that when I concentrate explicitly on trying to find a melody or a solution to an arranging difficulty, a roadblock, if I concentrate directly on it, the solution escapes me always. It's always when I am not paying attention that it grabs me.
And you don't find that the state that you reach in meditation allows for those ideas to appear?
I don't think so. I mean, for me personally.
Yeah.
Now, I am a big fan of meditation, and I do it mostly for regulation of my own anxiety issues and my own, mental health. And again, as I said before, there can be something very meditative about like doing long tones for a long time and really getting inside the feeling of the vibrations. But talking specifically of writing music, it's best when I am just awash in stuff.
Wow.
For me personally.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Because when I am super clear-headed and super focused, the music that I write from experience tends to sound very myopic in a way. It sounds like a musical exercise. I mean, when I do, which is cool. Those tunes I still play, but I find that it's not as much an organic expression of me as when I'm just have stuff coming at me.
Huh. Do you exercise?
Strange, right?
And if so, how do you feel that exercise impacts creativity and performance?
I have had an on and off relationship with exercise, mostly related to health concerns. When I was a young man, I exercised religiously, like super religiously. And I felt that, not that it had a direct result on my music, but that it was another way for me to feel, as a fellow neurodivergent, you understand the endless pursuit of the dopamine rush.
Yes.
And the way I have always fed that craving is by making steps towards a goal, like being able to check it to say, like, I made progress towards something, or I got a little bit better at something, or it's another day that I can mark a slash through.
Yes.
And for me, exercise was about that too. It's about building my health. It's being able to run a little bit farther or a little bit faster each time, or being able to lift a little bit more weight. And so that's why I was into it as a young man. When I had my first child, I just didn't have as much time and, frankly, as much money. So I didn't go to gym and I didn't run as much. And, I kind of let it go for a while. And I developed some health issues.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
I had to have spinal surgery about 5 years ago. And I think that was a result of a confluence of things. One, not maintaining my physicality, and also allowing stress to manifest itself physically in my body. I became more hunched over. I was always like this. I wasn't sleeping enough. A lot of times you can manifest stress in your lower back.
For sure. And I think all of this maybe requires a little bit of clarity for listeners who don't have experience with ADHD, but there's sort of two types of ADHD. There's sensory seeking ADHD, and then there's sensory avoidant ADHD. And it sounds like you and I actually share the sensory seeking ADHD, where your brain actually just basically just wants stimulation, like you said, that dopamine rush. You just want to do things. It just feels good when you're doing like 3 things at once and your brain is just like at its breaking point and it's just stimulated. It just feels good.
Right.
I think what's interesting as well is you say the psychology of either almost achieving a goal or after trying really hard achieving a goal, you actually do get a dopamine rush when you achieve a goal or when you've come very close to achieving a goal.
Right.
I think too that from a sort of meta perspective, if we zoom out, it seems that from your experience that the lack of exercise did have an impact on your music. As someone who plays the saxophone, being able to carry the instrument around your neck is an integral part of playing. And sure, at home, I've seen a lot of people who have different physical limitations, like literally string the saxophone up from the ceiling and like have all these contraptions and stuff. But when you're traveling around gigging, it quite simply is not practical. I suppose you could stick it on a stand if you really wanted to, but it doesn't move with your body in the same way. So I think from if we zoom out, the exercise does have an impact ultimately on not just you, but anyone who's trying to play music over the long term, in the sense that you need to use your body to play the music. And if the body's not there, it can be difficult or limit your opportunities to engage in music. Do you feel that's correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, it became a self-fulfilling death spiral
Mm.
because, I mean, I have you could say I have a genetic predisposition towards this sort of what my neurosurgeon called it degenerative disc
Yes.
disease.
Yes.
But on the same time, as if I had continued to strengthen the muscles around my back and my spinal column, and perhaps started doing yoga earlier, I might have prevented a lot of the degeneration that happened. And not coincidentally, it was the two discs right at between C6 and C7 and C7 and C8, which is right where the saxophone neck strap sits, that ruptured and impinged my spinal column and had to be removed and the vertebrae fused. And what happens is, when the spinal column was impinged right there, it was putting a crush on the ulnar nerves that run right here.
Wow.
And I became so weak in my forearms and hands, and I had constant icy hot nerve pain in my hands at all times. I was on 3 different medications. I would get cervical injections into the discs to reduce the inflammation. I actually had to give up playing for a while, and I had to cancel gigs, and it was really bad. And it was at that point that I decided, I had spent 3 years managing symptoms through conservative methods and therapeutic methods. I think it's time to try the surgery. So that's when I made the decision to get the discectomy fusion, and which, as soon as I woke up, notwithstanding the anesthetic, all of that pain was gone, and I instantly felt a lot stronger. And what I started using was the Jazz Lab sax holder, which is a harness. It's a hard harness that sits around the shoulders and gives a counterweight on the abdomen. A lot of people use it. It can be cumbersome if you're wearing a jacket and tie, but to me, it's totally worth it, because even now, if I try to use a traditional neck strap, I can feel like a little bit of the tingles.
Oh,
here.
Wow. Yeah. What's the name of that harness you use?
The Jazz Lab sax holder.
Lab sax holder. We'll put a link for that in the show notes as well.
And I don't endorse them or anything or have a relationship with a company, but literally, I would not be able to play the saxophone anymore if not for this product. It's the only one that I found that works for me.
Wow.
Ooh, sorry about that.
Oh, it's okay.
That's an alarm reminding me to go check on the plants on the balcony in case it gets hot and they need more water.
Do you define yourself as a musician, a human who plays music, or something else?
Well, I think if you asked me in my 20s, I would define myself as a saxophone with eyeballs. But I think my wife has had a big hand in the person who I am now, which is a human who plays, writes, and teaches music. She sort of, I was, again, as I say, I was more saxophone than man, and she tamed me.
She gave the tin saxophone a heart.
Exactly. That's exactly what happened. So now definitely my life is about so much more than saxophone, and even my musical pursuits, because when I was in my 20s, I was just all about shedding for 12 hours a day. That's all I cared about. And if I could only practice 10, then I would feel guilt about it.
Yes.
And the next day I'd have to make up for it.
So speaking of shedding, right now, do you have a time or times of day that you prefer to practice?
Well, so right now, finally, both of my children are back in school. Thank God. So I can be productive during the day again. Not that I didn't enjoy spending extra time with them, but it's enough already. So I find that for writing and things where I have to think, I am freshest in the late morning, between 9 o'clock and noon. That's when I get my writing or my remote mixing or my, anything that I have to do that requires focus and concentration beyond this. Then I like to eat lunch, and then after lunch, I will practice flute or clarinet, whatever I need to. I like to alternate my doubles by day. One day I'll do flute, next day clarinet, excuse me, and then I'll do an hour of saxophone before I have to pick up my youngest kid. Then he comes home, and while he's doing his homework, try to get another hour of saxophone in. And then we hang out for a little bit until it's time for me to start my teaching.
Mm.
So the question is, time of day, yes. So I would say it's early afternoon for practicing, late morning for writing. I used to have a rehearsal studio in downtown Brooklyn where I would go at night if I needed to, if I didn't get to shed during the day, and practice at night. But I found by then my brain was so fried I could only do rote stuff like scales or long tones or whatever. I couldn't do anything that required focus like transcribing or what have you.
So on average, how many hours a day do you practice right now? And on average, how many days a week?
So what does practicing include? Just saxophone, all instruments together? Does it
when we
include
say
writing
practicing,
too?
let's think technical instrument stuff. So you're actually, it's not reviewing, it's not playing, you're not reviewing repertoire, you're really getting in there and like working something out.
Fundamentals. Okay, so I would say a good, again, it depends on the day because different days I have different teaching loads. But I would say around an hour to an hour and a half. And that's across all instruments. And I would even posit that a lot of the writing I do is practice too, because,
True.
I do writing exercises and stuff when I'm not working on an actual assignment.
Could you maybe break down for listeners who don't understand what doubling means, why you as a reported saxophone player also are taking time to practice the flute and practice the clarinet?
Well, doubling refers to when saxophone players say that they want to work on doubling or that they are doublers, it means that they also play other woodwind instruments. Most frequently, saxophonists will double on flute and clarinet, although some might have more of a strength for one or the other. And if you are known, if you're staked your career on being a doubling specialist, like you work in the pits and Broadway, where budget cuts have required one player to cover several instruments, you may also double on oboe, bassoon, whatever is needed for the particular gig. So it's not considered doubling or tripling or quadrupling. It's just doubling. So that requires, a basic technical proficiency to be able to read and execute music. Now, for most jazz musicians, if you are asked to play in a big band, the general compliment is like the alto players are expected to play a little functional flute. The tenor players are expected to play a little functional clarinet, and the baritone players are expected to play some bass clarinet. And mainly that's because in the history of the music, writers, the great writers like Duke Ellington, Thad Jones, Quincy Jones, Gil Evans, etc., have wanted to get a wider variety of orchestral colors out of the saxophone section. So if you are not able to play these other instruments, your employment possibilities could be more limited unless you are like a super huge star, like Joshua Redman or Wayne Shorter. I haven't heard either one of them play flute or clarinet, although I'm sure they probably could. Yes. So that's what I'm talking about. I don't play with too many big bands, although I do play with a few and I write for them. But generally, my flute playing is stronger than my clarinet playing because I asked to do it more. Now, also as a teacher, I do teach flute and clarinet to middle school and high school students, as well as some basic doubling to my college level saxophone students. So it has been important for me to keep my chops up so that I can be a better teacher. And I think that's the most interesting thing to me about teaching is that I find that the more I get into teaching, the more I realize that I need to work on myself. It reminds me of the things that I have to do. So if I'm telling a student, you need to be able to start a low B flat, pianissimo with a full tone, not a subtone, and I can't do it, That's a
Mm-hmm.
problem. So I better
Mm-hmm.
keep that up. So that's where I mean, I'm not a good flute player by any stretch of the imagination, but I can play well enough to be a good teacher. And to I mean, obviously, I'm not going to teach flute at the conservatory level, but to my band students,
Oh, sure.
and also I can get through most parts that I'm asked to play if I have some time to practice it and make sure it's not challenging.
What is the maximum length of time for an effective technique or fundamentals practice session for you? So, like, at what hour does your brain just sort of tap out and go, I've had enough?
I don't reach that point
Whoa, okay, interesting. Please tell me
because
more.
I think that this is a function of my ADHD inattentive, and that the technical practicing was when I was in high school. It became my hyper focus.
Uh,
Um, and in high school, in the summers between school years, I would practice 10 to 14 hours a day, and it almost exclusively was this stuff. It was like practicing phrases from Charlie Parker solos over and over again in different keys, and doing scales super fast and patterns and that sort of stuff. That's where I built the base of my instrumental technique on the saxophone. And I've always felt that my ADHD super focus superpower was
yes.
most useful in helping me achieve that technique early, because it didn't phase me to sit there and do
Yes.
scales for 3 or 4 hours. And to do them excruciatingly slowly, and just to focus on the detail of getting the finger
Yep.
motions exactly coordinated. Um, if I when I was in in after my freshman year of high school, I went to the North Texas Summer Jazz Camp, and the saxophone faculty member at the camp said that he took a lesson with Branford Marsalis, and Branford's could point out all the unintentional grace notes where certain fingers were slower than
Ah,
others.
yes. Yes.
And so that struck a chord with me. And so I learned to listen for that in my own playing very early, and I would isolate those and like attack them. So for me, I don't seem to have a limit on what I can do. I think as far as that's concerned, I think for me, the greater challenge is to avoid falling into the trap of just doing mostly that because it feels so good to me.
Right, and then it ends up not being music. While it's technically productive, it's less musically productive.
Right. And there's definitely limiting returns the more you get into it, because really, how proficient and clean do you need to be in a
Mm.
post Michael Brecker, Chris Potter world? Because, if you want the cleanest saxophone playing, those are the guys, right? So, I mean, yeah. And I remember, and I see, I've heard and seen Melissa Aldana play many times, and her technique is like so perfect and
Mm.
relaxed, and her embouchure is so perfect. And I think, like, I start to think when I see artists who have got the craft that down, that stone cold, and their technique is so perfect, it makes me think, wow, I really should get back to doing that. And my brain just gets carried away. And I'm like, oh no, I have other stuff to work on.
Well, yeah, that's a big thing. And then just also break down for our listeners, if you didn't sort of put two and two together, another characteristic of sensory seeking ADHD is called hyperfocus. And that's really sort of, if we're going to call anything a strong objective advantage of the sensory seeking ADHD, it is an objective advantage, because you can literally sit down and work on a task for hours to the exclusion of everything else, which then of course can become its own disadvantage in its own way. But like you say, I also talk about it the same way. It's sort of this magical superpower that once you get into a groove of doing something, the rest of the world just ceases to exist, and all that is existing is whatever activity you're involved in at the time. So when you practice the most in your life, you mentioned shedding 10, 12 hours a day. Was this a fairly consistent thing over a long period of time?
Yes. Um, Obviously, yeah, when I was in high school, in the summers between high schools, high school years. I started having gigs in San Antonio when I was in high school. Um, so I never felt the pressure to have a summer job because I was working in other ways. So I was able to justify spending all my daytimes practicing. Um, and then also when I was in college, when I didn't have, so I went to Berkeley for undergraduate school. And I decided very early on that I wanted to major in performance. And once you decide to major in performance, basically they want you to practice as much as possible. So once I got my core classes out of the way, I decided that this is my job to do here. This is what I need to be doing to be successful. I've decided to do this. I do have feelings about that now after having lived my life. But at the time,
So
I was
just to
doing 8 to
pause you
10
there,
hours.
Patrick, when you say you have feelings about that, do you mean you have feelings about your concentration being performance?
I have feelings about not being aware of all the different opportunities that were there at Berkeley for me to take advantage of that I didn't because I was so laser focused on instrumental proficiency.
Ah. So
But
what
but I
would your
think about
recommendation be to people who currently are either considering or in their first year or two of a performance track at any music school? What would you recommend people look at, think about, consider if you could tell your younger self?
Okay. Well, two things is to not discount how important your social life is to your future.
Mm.
Um, because when I think about the time I was at Berkeley, the first things that come to my head are the other students I was there with, that I was friends with, that I played with. I mean, many of them have gone on to become extremely successful and accomplished artists. I already said Miguel Zenon, Bob Reynolds, Jaleel Shaw, Walter Smith, Kendrick Scott, Lionel Lewicke, Lage Lund, so many amazing musicians. And I learned so much from all of them, and I run into them over and over again in my life, and it's just so great and inspiring to have come up with so much talent, and to still have like a connection. We have a shared connection to something, and not to mention the fact that so many of the career opportunities that I've had are all boiled down to personal relationships
Mm.
that I made when I was in college.
So, number one, for people who are in a performance track or considering a performance track, take the time to cultivate, maintain, and grow those social relationships.
And not always just thinking like with an eye towards the future, I want to be involved with this person in the future because I think they're going to be successful, but also to enjoy relationships for their own sake. Because, I mean, many people will say that college is the best time of your life, and for many people it is. I feel that I was so consumed with perfecting my own craft that I didn't enjoy it at the time as much as I wish that I had. And I think even though I was constantly arranging opportunities to play with the other students, I think that I was too focused on myself and not as much on a shared sense of community. And I think that is super important because as I've seen in my life, the music community is so interconnected.
Mm-hmm.
And now with so much of it happening, for better, for worse, on social media and in public, it is even more interconnected than it ever was. So that's the number one thing that I tell students, especially when I do visiting artist clinics. I say, cherish the people around you because first of all, life is all about people. That's the number one thing in life is the people. And the people that you have around you are going to hopefully stay with you forever, move in and out of your life at different times. And those relationships are important. The other thing, as pertains to the last conversation we were having, is I think it's important for young aspiring musicians to realize that surviving as an artist in the 21st century requires having a functional knowledge of a lot of different things.
Mm-hmm.
And most school programs these days will allow you to have a taste of a lot of different things. So particularly at Berklee, you can take music. You're required to take a music technology course. You can take a course in production or synthesis, film scoring. I got my master's at Manhattan School of Music. I took an orchestration course. There's all sorts of things that you should get a little taste of everything, whether it's writing, arranging, if you're a saxophone player, doubling. I think even brass players have to double too. If you're a trumpet player or you're a trombone player and you can figure out a little tuba, that's going to be great. Now you got to learn other technology stuff. You got to learn about video production. You got to learn about the notation, software. There's so much to learn. All right. So learn a little bit of as much as you can. So later on in life, when you find yourself needing to develop that skill, you already have a base frame of reference. Because trust me, when you're 42 years old and you've never done video editing and you open Final Cut Pro and it's just like your eyes glaze over and you're like, I have to do this now. I wish I had learned something about something earlier before my brain was all calcified from old age.
Well, that is fantastic advice. Right now, when you have time to practice, how do you divide or segment your practice time? Like, how much time do you spend on fundamentals versus repertoire versus something else?
This is something I always tell my students. And in fact, I've given lectures on teaching strategies for teaching neurodivergent students.
Huh.
It has always been super important for me to come up with a practice schedule.
Yes.
No matter how much time I'm going to have. If I only have 20 minutes versus if I have 4 hours, I sit and I plot out what I'm going to do so that I don't get in the trap again of just doing da 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 for an hour and a half, as my brain will let me do if I let it. I like to schedule fundamentals first, not all of them, but some sort of long tones first. If I have 1 hour or if I have 2 hours, I will always do the first 1/4 of that time with tonal exercises, whether it's long tones or overtones or attack and release or dynamic breath control. I'll always do that. Then I'll do something else that'll be a sort of a finger warm-up. It could be working on the technical aspects of an improvised solo. It could be some sort of exercise or a scale or a classical etude. I don't front load all of my technical stuff to the beginning of the lesson because I don't want my brain to be burned out by the time it gets to the stuff that I need to do that requires thinking later on. Then I will do some sort of conceptual work. Like if I'm working on, for example, upper structure triads or whatever, then something that requires me to think in the abstract. Then I'll practice my upper structure triads and like I'll put on I like to sequence play-alongs for myself in Logic where I'll play like one chord for like 8 measures and then just loop it. And then I'll try to come up with organically some sort of improvisatory exercise based on the topic that I'm working on. It could be upper structure triads. It could be polyrhythms. It could be whatever it is. And then I will reserve the last fourth for improvising just in general. I could say like I need to learn a tune, so I'm going to practice this tune. Or I have this gig where I need to play that tune. I'll practice that tune. Or I just feel like working on my unaccompanied improvisation. So I just turn my metronome on and I'll just play without any sort of agenda. And then I always end with a little bit of a warm down on long tones again.
Around creativity and writing in this first part of your day, like you say, the late morning, everything's sort of quiet. You can sit down, focus. These sort of, we could call them the high IQ tasks, the ones that take a lot of thought and a lot of care and planning. Do you take any steps to stay creative? Like, do you make sure that in the morning, you're going to do certain things, you're going to talk to certain people, you're going to avoid certain situations or enter certain situations to ensure an outcome of a creative space later on in the day, or is that up to chance?
I think it's up to chance.
Okay.
Pretty much. The only space I have in my day for this is late morning.
Yeah.
Because once the kids are home and once my teaching starts, then there's just no chance. There's no chance of it.
Because shifting gears between the teaching gear, the parenting gear, and the creative writing gear, it's like you're three different people. And
I'm thinking of responsibilities, and I have a time.
Yeah.
Excuse me, a time frame. And then at the end of the day, I might be able to squeeze some stuff in if it's like, if it's cleaning up parts in Sibelius, but something that's not too creative.
Yes.
Because my brain just gets fried. I can't really think at the end of the day.
Do you have a time or times of day where you feel more creative? Like, even though your schedule's worked out in such a way, this is also a function of how everything else in your life is basically set up. Are there times of day where maybe you don't have a pen and paper and you're feeling more creative, or is it really that early morning time?
It's the early morning time. I was about to say when I'm on the subway going to the school where I teach, but that also is in late morning.
Yeah, okay.
Because on the subway ride home in the early evening, I'm not particularly creative.
No, you've been teaching all of that. Forget about it. So have you ever experienced burnout from too much time spent on music?
I'm trying to think if I have. I think that they're not music in general. I think that there are individual tasks that I do get burnt out on. At the beginning of pandemic, when nobody had any gigs anymore, I really wasn't, I didn't feel motivated to practice my saxophone beyond maintaining of my technical stuff. Mm-hmm. And this was not a conscious decision I made. I didn't feel right to me. I was more interested in just playing Handel sonatas on the flute, or doing stuff that I didn't feel any sort of career angst about, or I didn't have any ambitions. That was when I started in earnest writing music for big band, because it was something that I always wanted to do, but I always had too much going on to start working on. But well, guess what? I didn't have any other professional activities going on, so it was a good time to tackle that. But I don't think I've ever thought that I've been burnt out of anything music. Even when I think vacations are important to step away. Mm-hmm. Even when I've been on vacation, I still listen to music. I still think about it. I still bring manuscript notebook with me on the plane to write out ideas as they come to me, or if I'm listening, I could listen to transcribe a Sonny Stitt solo on the plane or something by hand if I wanted to. So I don't think that I've ever gotten burnt out on music as a whole. There have been times when I've just thought like, I just don't feel like doing this one thing anymore. And then I step away from it, and eventually I'll get back to it.
With the inspiration that you have, both for the more, it's funny that I'm even thinking about notes as being a micro inspiration, but from the way you describe your process, is like the macro inspiration is these general gestures, these feelings, this overarching concept of form, what's going to happen. When you have either those sort of macro or micro inspirations, do you experience it as an upwelling, as a download? It appears in your mind. How is your experience with that?
I think it happens two ways. You ever experienced this where, like, you're thinking about something in your head, and it leads to something else, and it leads to something else, and it leads to something else, and then you blurt out something when you're at this point in the process, and then the people around you are like, "What are you talking about?" That's out of nowhere. And I'm thinking, well, it wasn't out of nowhere, because you said this, and it caused a chain reaction, and this is just like 5 steps removed from the thing that you said. And it seems like it's out of nowhere, but it's related. A lot of times ideas will come to me that way. And then other times, ideas will happen in a burst, I think. But I think that my ideas generally don't happen out of nowhere. And I think in a way, it's almost like a non-creative way of being creative. My
Yes.
ideas are almost always certainly grow out of something else that I've seen or I've heard or whatever. So I don't know how this answers that question.
It does. Oh, you've answered it fully. I
Okay.
think that
Well, there we go.
the first way you describe, I relate to it totally. I was even having a conversation with someone yesterday or 2 days ago, and they said something, and I was at like in half a second, I'm 4 steps removed in my head, and I said something which was, if you could see it, was relevant, but I sort of got one of these, like, wait
Yeah.
a second, what is? Because your mind's working a million miles an hour, and you think of it's like connection, and sometimes you don't think to explain the connections along the way to people. So
I'm often just chuckling at something in my head. My wife says, "What are you laughing about?" I'm like, "You don't want to know." Well, tell me. I'm like, "Okay," and I tell her, and she's like, "Well, that makes no sense. It's completely out of nowhere." I'm like, "Well, it makes sense in here."
So, do you like to write after listening to other music, or do you like to have a sort of clean slate from that musical perspective? So, you described your writing process as you want to have this sort of storm and these lightning bolts of inspiration coming out. Is listening to other people's music part of creating that storm?
Yes.
Okay. Cool.
Almost always. There have been a few times where I sat down out of nowhere and I wrote a song, but that doesn't happen very often. Mostly, like, for example, if I wanted to write, there's my octet album that came out about 5 years ago. I really wanted to write something that had a very Duke Ellington sort of sound to it. And so I just was mainlining nothing but Duke Ellington, and I wrote that piece after a week of that. Another part of it, I was hearing more of a Debussy sort of flavor, so then I was mainlining Debussy, and I think I'm a very adaptive oral sort of learner. I like, even when things not to do with music, I like to be told steps. I like to hear the steps in a process. I need to hear something being spoken in order to repeat it. I learn better if I hear music being played and learn it that way. So yeah, being immersed in the music, in a general flavor of something, is super important. And in fact, with the Way of the Cairns album, I wanted to step outside my aesthetic of being like, post-bop, modern post-bop sort of player and writer, and write for a more European, for lack of a better term, aesthetic. Because I was writing for European musicians, and I wanted it to be, I don't know, outside my comfort zone. I wanted to write outside my comfort zone.
Well, it's funny you say you're trying to write for a European perspective. When I heard some of the chordal movements and the chordal structures and the chord progressions on the album, some of them actually read almost like American pop R&B influence type of a thing.
I don't think necessarily in a harmonic sense.
Yes.
I think in the approach to the band and from a rhythmic sense. Like, for example, there's only one tune on the record that is explicitly swing feel, which is crazy for me because I'm super, like, everything has to be swinging for me.
Hang on. Hold on. You said everything has to be swing, not everything has to be swung.
Swing in.
Swing in. There we go.
But so I really immersed myself in the ECM catalog, just to get sort of a flavor, I don't know how else to describe it. It's just sort of it's sort of like an organic influencing. The more I listen to one particular thing, the more I can channel it. So
Super
that was what I was going for.
One last question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever experienced performance anxiety, or has performance anxiety ever threatened to impact or impacted a performance?
Yes. Less so these days, but, you know, sometimes, you ever hear of imposter syndrome?
Yes.
Not that I generally suffer from it, most of the time, or even quite frequently. But there was one time, so a while back, I got this grant to write new music from Chamber Music America, and we did the premiere live on NPR, as part of the series, the Checkout Live from Berkeley. So we did an octet concert and presented the music as a debut broadcast live on NPR. And that was a lot of pressure, more than I thought it would be. I didn't think about it at all in those terms until actually we were on. And I looked at the band on stage with me, and it was Kendrick Scott on drums, Gerald Clayton on piano, Miles Okazaki on guitar, John Ellis on tenor, Jason Palmer on trumpet, like amazing musicians, all brilliant, accomplished artists. And I just felt, wait a minute. For a split second, I felt, should I really be here?
Ah, yes.
But then then it snapped. Of course, it's your gig. They gave it to you. Of course you should be here. Otherwise, why would you be? So that was a time when I felt in the moment anxiety. And then always when I've written new music, there is a little element of, especially again, if it's outside my comfort zone, there's an element of, is this going to work?
You've never had a situation where you get on stage and it's like you sort of freeze, or you don't feel you're playing at your best because of nerves, because of anxiety?
No.
Oh,
I don't think that has happened. I think it happened once when I was 19. I auditioned for the Thelonious Monk Institute of Jazz, which is now the Hancock Institute. And, the judging panel was Ron Carter and Herbie Hancock and Wayne Shorter. John Clayton and Terrence Blanchard, and I was definitely nervous as a 19-year-old playing for those legends. But I don't think there has been. But granted, like I haven't yet played in the band of someone like Herbie Hancock. So maybe if I ever got hired by someone like that, and I was on this huge stage, and like the first gig, that might happen. But I don't think so. I think playing has become very comfortable for me, and it always has been. As long as I'm playing, I'm comfortable.
And
it's the other stuff. Yeah,
it's not just playing; it's performing. Yeah,
yeah. It's the other stuff. Like, do I deserve to be a band leader among these caliber of musicians? Is my writing up to? I feel. I felt self-conscious about my writing. Is whatever. Is my stature enough that I'm sharing? That I'm hiring someone like Carl Allen or Billy Drummond for a gig. Should they be playing with me? Do I deserve to be working with them? It's that sort of stuff. Yeah. But once I get to be like, playing and performing,
everything's good.
Yeah, everything's good. It's good.
Well, that was my last question. You have any last words?
That's it. Just thank you for having me. Thank you for doing this podcast. And I hope, despite my rambling, tangential motor mouthing, I hope that that people can get something out of this.
Oh, it was fantastic.
It's been a lot of fun.
Amazing. You can check out Patrick Cornelius. His latest album, Acadia, Way of the Cairns, is out now and available anywhere you get your music, and specifically on the Whirlwind Bandcamp. Links in the description below if you're on YouTube, in the show notes if you're on audio. You can find Patrick at patrickcornelius.com, twitter.com, P Cornelius Music, and Instagram at P Cornelius Music. And we've got Cairns if you're on video. Beautiful Cairns. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll see you guys next time.
Thank you.